The billionaire invited the janitor's daughter as a joke. Then she walked in and changed everything. The marble staircase of the Davenport estate shimmered under chandelier light as high society guests turned toward the unexpected sound of heels. Their laughter faltered. Elena Monroe had arrived. Her satin blue gown shimmered like moonlight on still water. Hair swept up, posture calm. She moved like someone born for ballrooms, not someone who had spent years scrubbing them. Near the wine fountain, Damien Davenport leaned closer to his circle of investors, his voice dripping with amusement. Well, she actually came. Our janitor's daughter in couture. Guess even the help needs a fantasy night. A few chuckled. Others whispered. Many stared, and one clapped. They were too stunned. For 2 years, Elena had cleaned floors inside this mansion, quiet, invisible. Never more than a nod from staff. Never a word from guests. And yet here she was, walking through them all like the ground owed her grace. The air shifted. Some guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Others looked her up and down, fishing for flaws. One woman muttered, "Who does she think she is?" But Elena never looked down. She made her way past crystal sculptures and polished pillars, her eyes holding steady, not arrogant, not afraid. Just ready. Ready for something no one else saw coming. It had started 3 days earlier, when a gilded envelope was tossed on her cleaning cart. Damien had grinned as he handed it to her. Formal gala. Saturday. Black tie. You'll be there, right? Behind him, his wife Camilla and their friends snickered. I'm sure she'll find something elegant in her closet, someone said, barely hiding the cruelty. They had expected her to decline. Or worse, show up in borrowed heels, trembling under chandeliers, begging to be let in. But Elena didn't beg. She prepared. Now, standing under the estate's vaulted ceiling, she looked like she had never left. Like this was not the start of something, but a return. And still, they whispered, why is she here? Where did she get that dress? Is this some kind of joke? No one realized they were seconds away from watching their entire world tilt. Elena moved toward the crowd, not with hesitation, but with purpose. Not seeking their approval, but their attention. And as the room leaned in, one question hung over every head. Who is she really? Elena Monroe was 36. And for the last 2 years, she had scrubbed every corner of the Davenport estate. Floors so clean they reflected the chandelier light like mirrors, doorknobs so polished they shone like silver coins. She was always the first to arrive and the last to leave. Always silent, always invisible, and no one knew her story. No one ever asked the Davenports. She was just part of the background, another uniformed worker whose job was to disappear when the guests walked in. Her name was rarely used. Sometimes she was just called her or that one. The worst of them was Damien Davenport, son of billionaire real estate mogul Charles Davenport. Inherited the estate, the business, the arrogance. He had never spoken to Elena like a human being, only with instructions, orders, or mockery disguised as politeness. Once, when she was polishing the grand piano, she overheard Damien joke to a guest, "Our floors are so clean, I could eat caviar off them. Thanks to whoever keeps showing up in that green jumpsuit." The guest had laughed. Elena had kept wiping, but she had heard everything. She always did. Elena never flinched, never cried in public. But every night, after her shift, she would sit in her small studio apartment, barely big enough to fit the secondhand bookshelf she adored, and write down what she'd heard. She had been documenting every whisper, every name, every account number left open on a carelessly displayed laptop screen. Because Elena wasn't just a cleaner. She was building a case. She had applied for the job at the Davenport estate for one reason, and one reason only: to get inside. Damien had no idea that the woman wiping down his marble countertops had once attended classical recitals in homes like his. That her mother had once taught piano to girls like Camilla. Before life had turned vicious and unfair, he didn't know that Elena Monroe had once belonged to a legacy he had buried. And then came the invitation point 3 days before the gala. As she was disinfecting the crystal sconces in the west hallway, Damien appeared with a gold-trimmed envelope in hand. He wore that same smirk he reserved for delivery drivers and interns. "Charity gala," he said, tossing the envelope onto her cart. "Saturday. Formal black tie. Hope you've got something dazzling." Elena had paused, her gloved hand frozen mid-wipe. Camilla walked by just then, sipping from a cut crystal glass, trailing perfume and laughter. "Damien, be nice," she said with a sharp smile. "She might surprise us all and show up in something borrowed and bedazzled." The hallway filled with laughter. Not playful, mocking. Elena simply nodded. "I'll be there." That was all she said. She waited until they were gone before picking up the envelope. Inside, embossed in gold, were the words, "An evening of elegance and generosity, Davenport Estate." A trap, plain and simple that he had invited her to be. Laughed at, to put her in her place. And not just in front of guests, but in front of the media. Cameras would be there. Reporters. Socialites. The people who built their status by stepping on others. But Elena was not the one who would fall. She did not run to a thrift store. She did not scroll through rental apps. She went to a small, locked case beneath her bed, and from it, she pulled out a dress wrapped in layers of silk and memory.it was her mother's dress, the same one worn 20 years ago, on the last night her mother ever attended a gala as a guest, not as a servant. A gown of soft satin blue, with pearl detail along the neckline and a train that moved like water in candlelight. Her mother, Elena Monroe, had once been known in those circles. A pianist, a teacher, and, unbeknownst to most, a lover of Charles Davenport before he returned to his real family. When Elena stepped into that dress, it was not an act of rebellion.it was a return. That gown was not borrowed.it was claimed. Each step she took that night down the marble stairs was not just a step into a party. It was a step back into a story that had been forcibly erased. Damien had invited a ghost. But Elena came as a storm, because not all storms destroy. Some teach you how to dance. Elena glided across the ballroom. The laughter thinned. Whispers replaced the giggles. Eyes narrowed, not in admiration, but in confusion, even fear. She was not walking like someone out of place. She was walking like someone returning home. A hush fell over the nearest group of guests as her train whispered over the marble. People tilted their glasses mid-sip, pretending not to stare. One woman whispered to her husband, "She's not acting like she's beneath us." Another guest nodded. "She's walking like she owns the room." Even the orchestra seemed to play softer, as if unsure whether this was still the same party. Elena passed by oil paintings of past Davenports, men in suits, women in diamonds. She did not flinch at the gazes thrown her way. If anything, she welcomed them. Each one landed on her like a match, and she simply refused to burn. Across the room, Damien sipped from his champagne glass, smirking. His confidence returned with each step he took toward her. He assumed her silence meant she was intimidated, that she was just playing brave, that she would break, like people like her always did. "Elena," he said with mock surprise. "You actually came. I have to admit, I'm impressed." She turned to him slowly, calm, collected, her expression unreadable. "I gave you the benefit of the doubt," Damien continued, his tone loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "But I figured a person like you," he paused deliberately, letting the insult hang like perfume, "would find this kind of environment overwhelming." Elena tilted her head slightly. "A person like me?" she asked, voice soft but razor-sharp. He chuckled. "I mean, this isn't exactly your world." She let the silence stretch until it began to choke him. Then she said, "You are wrong." Damien's smirk faltered. "I'm not overwhelmed. I'm not intimidated," she said, meeting his eyes directly. "In fact, I feel exactly where I have always belonged." The words didn't just land. They shifted something. A few guests turned to look at each other. The laughter died. The masks began to slip. A quiet tension rippled through the room like the slow pull of a tide just before a wave crashes. Because now, suddenly, they weren't so sure who Elena Monroe really was. She stood tall, shoulders back, chin high, not with arrogance, but with something more unsettling: certainty, grace, presence. **** Damien tried to force a chuckle, but it came out dry. "Well, enjoy the evening," he said, waving his glass in a mock toast. "This will be one for the books." "Oh, it will," Elena replied, her voice velvet and steel. "But not for the reasons you think." She turned and walked away, leaving Damien standing in his own home like an outsider at his own event. And as she moved through the crowd again, a truth settled over the guests like falling ash. She was never just a janitor. Damien clinked his silver spoon against his champagne glass. Everyone, he said loudly, forcing a charming grin as guests turned toward him. Before we continue the evening, I'd like to introduce someone very special. He gestured to the center of the ballroom, where Elena stood illuminated by the chandelier's golden light. Our loyal janitor, Miss Elena Monroe. Laughter exploded across the room. Asterisk. Phones came out like weapons. Flashes, videos, whispers. Is he serious? What kind of joke is this? Camilla covered her mouth, trying to look concerned, but her eyes sparkled with cruelty. But Elena did not move. She did not smile. She did not retreat. She simply stood tall, letting the waves of mockery crash over her and fall useless at her feet. One guest muttered. She's not even flinching. Damien raised his glass with mock celebration. Who knew cleaning staff could be so photogenic? More laughter. More cameras. Then Elena stepped forward. One hand lightly touched the edge of her gown. The satin, the pearls, the unmistakable vintage cut. This dress, she said, loud enough for the front row to hear, belonged to my mother. Silence. A pause. Guests leaned in. She wore it to a Davenport gala in this very house. Before she was erased, Damien's smile wavered. What are you talking about? Elena's voice grew stronger, clearer. Before you erased her. And me. Gasps rose like wind through dry grass. Her name was Isabel Monroe. She taught piano in this house. She was respected, loved, until your father, Charles Davenport, decided she was an inconvenience. She stepped closer to Damien, her gaze steady, unwavering. My name is Elena Monroe Davenport. The room froze. I am your father's daughter. A single glass shattered in someone's hand. Camilla's expression went blank. Senator Whitmore's wife, who had just been laughing moments ago, turned pale. A guest whispered, "She's not staff, she's blood." Damien's lips parted, but no words came. "You're lying," he said finally, but it came out thin. "Fragile, am I?" Elena replied, her tone calm. "Do you want to see the family ring? The photographs? The letters he wrote my mother while your mother vacationed in France?" He shook his head. "This is insane. You remember her, Damien," Elena said, interrupting him, her voice now shaking with truth. "You were just a boy when she left, when she was forced to leave." "I don't," he started, but his throat tightened. "Maybe you forgot," she said, walking past him now, slowly circling the room. "Or maybe you were told to forget, told to believe she was just some hired help." She turned back to face him, her eyes burning with quiet fire. "But I never forgot. Not the way your family buried us. Cut off support. Sold the house he gave us. Left my mother to die in debt." Gasps turned into murmurs. People began shifting away from Damien. "You're not serious," Camilla whispered. "This can't be true." "I have proof," Elena said. "But more importantly, I have history." Her voice dropped, but it carried like thunder. "Your father didn't just abandon us. He hid us. He made sure no one in your polished little world ever knew about the daughter he left behind." Damien tried to laugh, to regain control. "This is ridiculous," he scoffed. "Even if, not if, Damien," Elena said, stepping close enough that only a breath separated them. "You always looked at me like I was nothing, but we share the same blood." She turned to the crowd, her final words landing like a strike of lightning. "I am Charles Davenport's daughter. I am your half-sister." The room broke. Chairs shifted. Wine spilled. Murmurs erupted like sparks on dry leaves. That Damien's face had gone ashen. He had planned to humiliate her. But now it was his identity unraveling. Elena reached into her clutch with a steady hand. From it, she pulled a velvet box. She opened it slowly, deliberately, then held the object high enough for everyone to see. That a gasp rippled through the ballroom. The ring sparkled under the chandelier's light. Gold, crowned with a brilliant sapphire, and engraved with the Davenport family crest. "The Davenport heirloom ring," whispered Judge Mason, half under his breath. "Only passed down to legitimate descendants. This," Elena said, her voice slicing through the silence, "belonged to my mother. Given to her by Charles Davenport." Damien took a step back, eyes wide. You stole that." "You cannot steal what is rightfully yours by birth," she replied. Then the ballroom doors opened. 3 people walked in. The first, Sophia Lane, one of the most respected investigative journalists in the state. The second, Dr. Emerson Reed, the Davenport family's private physician for over 2 decades. And the third, Malik Grant, a high-powered attorney specializing in contested inheritances. Now, the audience no longer laughed. They barely breathed. Sophia rolled a suitcase toward the projection screen. "With your permission," she said to Elena. "Please," Elena nodded. "Let's educate the room." Sophia connected her laptop. The screen flickered to life. The first image appeared, a bank transfer receipt. "This," Sophia began, "is a $250,000 transfer from Damien Davenport to Dr. Emerson Reed, dated 3 days after Charles Davenport's death." The memo line says, and I quote, "Keep quiet, or else." Murmurs erupted. Camilla clutched her pearls. A senator's wife sat down abruptly, face paled. "Doctor." Reed stepped forward. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice was calm. "For years, I stayed silent. Out of fear, out of loyalty. But I can no longer carry this." He looked straight at Elena. "Your father did not die of heart failure," he said softly. "He was poisoned, slowly, over several months. Arsenic. Small doses. Enough to mimic natural decline." The room gasped. "Damien," Reed continued, "discovered that your father had changed his will, that he intended to bring Elena into the family publicly and split the estate." He swallowed. "Shortly after Charles told me this, the poisoning began." Malik Grant stepped up next. "Here is a certified copy of the original will, retrieved from Charles Davenport's private attorney and verified by 2 separate witnesses." He opened the folder for the crowd to see. Elena Monroe Davenport is the legal heir to half the Davenport estate. Camilla staggered backward, grabbing a chair for support. "My God," Damien's voice cracked. "You can't prove any of this." "Oh," Elena said, eyes locked onto him. "Let me help you remember." She tapped her phone and connected it to the audio system. A recording played. Damien's voice, unmistakable. "If you say a word about what's in his blood, Reed, I'll make sure you never work again. You want to keep that license? Then shut your mouth. That woman and her bastard daughter can clean toilets for all I care." Dead silence. Then, a slow murmur. Phones were recording. Guests were backing away from Damien like he carried a disease. Sophia cued the next image. Falsified autopsy reports. Then another. Charity donations rerouted to private offshore accounts. And another. Emails showing collusion with 2 judges during an inheritance hearing. Asterisk, asterisk, each click was another nailed. Elena's voice rose again, steady and sharp. "You killed our father." Damien opened his mouth, but she cut him off. "You erased my life. Sold the house he gave my mother. Cut off every dollar. And then you hired me to clean." Her eyes welled but did not break. "I spent 2 years wiping his blood off the hands that ended his life." The ballroom fell into chaos. Gasps. Shouts. Camilla yanked her hand from Damien's shoulder and moved away, face full of revulsion. "Is it true?" someone cried. "He's a murderer," another whispered. Damien collapsed into a chair, face drained of all color. The predator had become the hunted. Reporters who had slipped in from the balcony now flooded the room, cameras rolling. "Elena, Ms. Davenport," someone shouted. "Did you know about all this when you took the job?" She turned slowly. "I applied for this job," she said calmly, "for one reason, to expose the truth." And then she paused, standing tall in the center of the room. "Everything you've seen tonight is only the beginning." The music had stopped, the drinks had gone warm, and the most exclusive gala in Brentwood had transformed into the greatest scandal society had ever seen. Damien sat slumped against the marble wall of the ballroom, his designer suit wrinkled, his eyes hollow. The guests no longer looked at him with admiration. They looked at him like a cautionary tale. Flashing red and blue lights cut through the glass windows as police cruisers pulled into the circular driveway of the Davenport estate. 2 uniformed officers stepped into the room. The doctor. Reed approached them and nodded solemnly. "He's the one. Damien Davenport. Suspected of murder, corporate fraud, blackmail, and obstruction." As the officers moved forward, Damien tried to rise to his feet, but his knees buckled beneath him. "No. Wait. This is a mistake. I can explain," he stammered. The officers didn't wait. They handcuffed him right there, in front of the crowd he once ruled. Elena stood tall, just a few feet away, her posture calm, her eyes unblinking. Damien turned his head toward her, desperate. "You destroyed my life." Her. Voice, steady and cold, cut through the air. No, Damien. You destroyed your own life. I just brought the truth into the light. Behind them, Camilla stood frozen, one hand covering her mouth. Her phone buzzed, another call from their daughter at college. She answered, voice trembling. I'm sorry, honey. I know. Yes, it's true. She looked at Damien, disgust on her face. They're seeing this on social media, she whispered to him. Your children are watching this in real time. Elena glanced at her. Then let them see what real justice looks like. Malik Grant stepped forward with a folder. The estate is frozen effective immediately, he announced. The Davenport Corporation has been seized pending federal investigation. Multiple civil suits are being filed, totaling damages in excess of $75 million. The crowd gasped again. What had started as an elite gala had become a live courtroom for one man's reckoning. Elena turned to face the sea of faces, many of whom had mocked her, ignored her, or cheered when she was humiliated. She wasn't angry. She wasn't triumphant. She was powerful. This, she said quietly but clearly, was never about revenge. She looked directly at Patricia Wellington, who had laughed the loudest when Elena arrived. It was about truth. For my mother, who was silenced. For me, who was erased. And for everyone who has ever been treated as invisible. No one interrupted her. Even the servers had stopped moving. Everyone listened. Elena stepped aside as the officers escorted Damien through the same grand doors where he had welcomed guests hours earlier. Confident, arrogant, untouchable. Now, he left in handcuffs. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Elena walked out onto the estate's balcony. From there, she could see the lights of Brentwood glittering against the night sky. Cameras flashed below. Reporters called her name. Her story had already spread like wildfire, but she wasn't thinking about any of that. She closed her eyes and exhaled. For the first time in 20 years, she felt something that money couldn't buy and power couldn't fake. Peace Point 6 months later, Elena Monroe Davenport sat behind the oak desk in what used to be Damien's office. But everything was different now. The cold, arrogant decor had been stripped away. In its place were framed photos of smiling employees, scholarship recipients, and community leaders. One wall displayed a simple plaque. Dignity begins where exploitation ends. Since Elena took over Davenport Holdings, company profits had risen 40%, not by cutting corners, but by lifting people up. Fair wages, real promotions, wellness programs, respect. The very things Damien had scoffed at were now the pillars of success. Dr. Emerson Reed now led the company's health and wellness initiative. Every employee, regardless of role, had access to free medical care. I never thought I'd have the courage to speak up, he told Elena during a board meeting. But you taught me that doing the right thing is always worth it. Camilla had moved out of state with her children. But before leaving, she visited Elena quietly, without cameras, without apologies, just truth. You didn't just save the company, Camilla said. You saved them from their father's shadow. Elena had simply nodded. Children don't deserve to carry the weight of their parents' sins. The media couldn't get enough. Forbes, The New Yorker, even late-night shows wanted to. No. How did a janitor dismantle an empire and build something better? In one rare interview, the host asked her directly, "Some say your justice was too cold, that you were too cruel." Elena smiled, calm and unwavering. "Revenge," she said, "would have been doing to him what he did to me. But justice? That changes the world." She declined most speaking events. Instead, she focused on what mattered, rebuilding lives. She adopted 2 young girls from the foster system, girls with wide eyes and guarded hearts, girls who reminded her of herself. Each night, she helped them with homework, not just math and spelling, but dignity, boundaries, truth. And sometimes, when they were asleep, she would step out onto the same balcony where Damien had once tried to humiliate her, but she no longer cleaned the glass. She looked out through. I teed at AS the owner, AS the survivor, AS the rightful heir. She thought of her mother, of Charles Davenport, of every person who had once been silenced. Not anymore. Power rooted in cruelty crumbles. But power rooted in truth, it multiplies.